thrilled to be here and share some tools that I find are truly game changing. These tools have significantly enhanced my development process, and I'm excited to share this with you. And hopefully, you will find some benefit by using it too. In this session, I will be diving into Blazing Story, Playwright, and accessibility testing tools. These are powerful resources that can transform the way we build and test components. But before we dive into these tools, let me introduce myself. You might have noticed my accent. So I am originally from South Africa and now live very happily here in Australia. I'm a software developer at Metro North Health, but my journey into the software world has been anything but conventional. I have been a tech traveler for over 2 decades. Imagine me as a player upon a stage of technology, journeying from roles such as a hardware technician, telephonic software support specialist, to a specialized consultant, finding my true calling in software development over a year ago, 10 years, not a year, 10 years ago. So, what sets my tale apart is that I'm entirely self taught, learning through determination and passion. I've worn many hats and faced diverse challenges. And through this journey, my husband, a seasoned software engineer, has been my steadfast guide and support. As I stand before you today, I'm inspired by the giants of the tech world, all of you who have paved the way for adventurers like me. And today I'm excited to share my latest adventure with you. So, tonight I'll be diving into the three main topics. I'll provide an overview and then explore one of many ways that can be implemented. And then we'll dive into the code. So, let's start with unveiling Blazor Story. For those who may not know, Blazing Story is a powerful tool for building UI components in isolation. But what does this mean, building components in isolation? Well, we can create and work on Blazor components independent of a larger application. This picture is simulating a large application and all the blocks being different components and areas within the application. Adding a new feature, for example, that dark orange block, as you can imagine, can be very challenging. And instead of building and testing within the complete application environment, we can isolate the component, design, develop, and test it in a standalone environment. So let's look at some benefits of developing the components in isolation. So we can quickly prototype and iterate on individual components without needing to set up the entire application, leading to faster development cycles. We can establish a centralized library that adhere to design guidelines, ensuring consistency across the application. We can work on different components simultaneously without stepping on each other's toes, those merge conflicts, right? This approach should improve overall development speed. It will make it easier to manage the visual aspect of each component without affecting the rest of the application. Isolated components can serve as a living documentation, showcasing each component's usage and variations. This can aid collaboration between developers and should help us maintain a consistent design language. So, if you are familiar with Storybook, you might be thinking, hey, that sounds familiar. And you're absolutely right. Storybook has been a game changer for developing UI components in a JavaScript frameworks like React, Vue, and Angular. It provides developers with an interactive environment to build, test, and showcase their components outside of the main application. Now, Storybook was launched in 2016 and it has over 84,000 GitHub stars and over 1,900 contributors. Storybook has a lot of features to offer. Now, Blazoring Story takes the same powerful concept and adapts it specifically for Blazor, enabling us to develop, test, and refine Blazor components in isolation. It's like having a tailored version of Storybook for the Blazor ecosystem, making our workflow more efficient and focused. Now, Blazing Stories is also an open source repo and created roughly 2 years ago with almost 300 stars and 4 contributors. It's rather obvious that it's not that feature rich yet. But we can install Blazing Story templates by running this CLI command or selecting it from a NuGet package manager. The installation will create 2 templates, and we can select either Blazor server or WASM app, and we'll start a new code. So let's jump into the code. Let's actually start looking at Blazing Story first before we just jump into the code. And this is the application. This is running Blazing Story right here. You'll notice that the buttons folder is expanded and docs is selected, which is now giving us a preview of the buttons component. Down below, we can see all of the properties for this component with some documentation for each property. We can then change those values as we wish. So I don't know, we can make this JetBrains. Have I spelled that right? It doesn't look right. We can change the color of the button over here to anything we want. And we can toggle the enable and disabled feature of this button. We can then click on the show code and copy this code to use it in our application wherever we want to pull this component. We also have different stories for this component. So we have an inactive story for the buttons component already, or we can also group our components together to have things more categorized. And for example, if I expand my quick grid, we have enabled templates. As you can see, because I'm in a story, there's no longer the documentation, but just an option for us to change the values if we so need to. And we can just toggle and change the default view of the component just as we wish. So this is interesting, but how is everything fitting together? How is Blazing Story actually? How can we work with it? So let's have a look at the code base. This is not what I want to show you. So we'll start here. So this is my solution, and this is the running app. And if we look at my project file, you'll see that this is a .NET application. And a few lines down, we've got this generate documentation file enabled, which will add the documentation for each property that we've added. And you can see over here, I've got the Blazing Story package installed, as well as the quick grid package and WebAssembly packages. There's nothing really else much to it. Once we've explored the project file, let's have a look at the www root folder and see what else is in here. Now we see there's an iframe file. Now the iframe file is applicable to the preview of my component, that little block there that showed my component. And there's a note that they left in here for us saying that if we have any CSS frameworks or JavaScript files, to add them into this file and not into the index.html file. And that's exactly what I did here. You'll notice here I've got my Bootstrap framework installed. I've got, well, a link to it rather. And there's also a link to my icons, and I've got some additional CSS files all wrapped up here. And further down, you'll notice there's nothing out of the ordinary here. Let's look at the index.html file, the standard file, the one we used to. Now, they left a note here, a reminder that we should not be editing or changing anything in the index.html file because it won't really have an effect or the desired effect. So we should not add our CSS frameworks into the index.html file. And when I scroll down, it's just boilerplate index.html file, nothing really else to get excited about. Let's look at the program.cs file. Boilerplate, this is a WebAssembly component application, and it routes us through to the app component. Now, if I look at the app.razor file, it is wrapped in a Blazing Story app component where we can specify the title of our component Add color schemes. So I've selected light. You don't have to, but you can if you wanted to. We've got an option of light and dark and default. Default will just select whatever your browser settings, default settings is. Then we have the default layout where we can actually change the layout of Blazing Story. If you feel like you want to add maybe a logo, like a branding logo, you can do that inside this tag here, brand logo area. But for now, let's just hop onto the default layout screen and have a look over here. So we inherit from the component base, very standard, and then we have this body tag. Now we can wrap this body tag in a theme provider if you wanted to, and change the theme completely if you so wish. So if we have a look at that's basically it for us for starting up the application. Now you may notice that I have this components folder. Now note that the components in this project is all linked inside this project, but you can reference a component library instead of having the components inside this project. So if we expand components, there's a buttons folder, and inside the buttons folder, I have my components, my button.razor component. And this is very standard. It's a bootstrap button. As you see here, some styling happening here. We are referencing some properties. As you can see, we've got a toggle. We're referencing color, and we have the text property as well. When we look at the code section, this is generated because we've got that generate code enabled. So it will give you the summary tags, and then you just need to fill out this section. It's not going to do that for you, not yet. And then this is a Blazor parameter. It is a required field, and you can see text is a string field. That makes sense. I was able to type my new button text in there. And then I have my color. Now, color is interesting because it's a type of string. However, when we were in Blazing Story, it was not a string. It actually was a color picker. So how does that work? We'll check that out in a second. Disabled is just a Boolean value. I'm just going to close all these tabs just to avoid confusion. So now that we've looked at my buttons component, we want to look at the story. That's actually contain more of the information of why color is a color picker and how this is actually displayed in my Blazing Story application. So the naming convention of the story component is very important. You have to have the same component name, button, dot, and then the word stories, dot, razor. If you fail to call it the same name as your actual component up here, then some of the features in Blazing Story won't work. So this is just an important side note. When we look at our stories component, here on line 1, there's an attribute with stories, and then we have a title buttons. And this line is telling Blazing Story where to place your component in the navigation bar. Now that it's placed on my navigation bar, we're saying fine, that all the following stories are all linked back to the buttons component. And that's this part over here. And then inside this block, we've got an argument type where we're saying the property color is of control type color, and that gives the color of the control type color. We have a few options here, of course. So we can set fields like radio, which is an enumerator. So you can set up enums. You can have selects as well, drop downs if you wanted to, and then the color selection. You only have to really do this for color and selections and radio control types. Then it starts off with our very first story. In this case, it's default. Then we've got a few arguments. We're passing through default values for the properties. So in this case, we have the disabled property field, which is set to false for the story called default. And we have the text, which is just default as well. Then the template, we're just saying, just use my button and pass through any communications back to this buttons component. So yeah, that's interesting, right? But let's actually add our own component. Let's do this ourselves. Let's get our hands dirty. So I already created a cards folder for us and a card example.razor file. And now I need to add a card example, just a boilerplate bootstrap card. And so I need to now type this out, right? But I'm not going to do that because I won't do that to you and I won't do it to myself. My nerves will definitely get the best of me. So I brought my book of spells with me tonight. So I'm going to summons, let's see, not that one. I'm going to summons my awakened card spell. And so all this does, it's a live template. It will just paste code for me, which is a standard Bootstrap card. This should look very familiar if you're familiar with Bootstrap. And you can see it's very static, nothing is dynamic, and that's what we have. But if I run the app now, my card story won't appear because I don't have a story yet. I need to add a story to the application. So I'm going to hop on back to my stories folder. There's my cards folder, and I already created a blank file for us, which is card example.stories.razor. And over here, the same thing applies. I'm going to pull out my book of spells and cast my awakened story spell. I just have to fix this order. Okay. And over here on line 1, we have a story. And here he's saying, I want to put this into a folder called cards. And within that, call this component card example. I'm linking it back to my card example component and calling my story default and passing through my template card example. Very basic, very straightforward. So what we are expecting is to see Blazing Story with cards folder, card example, and just a preview of my card. So we'll run the app and there we go. Here we see is the cards folder that I've just created. And then we have the card example. There's my very basic standard Bootstrap card. But this is rather boring because there's no properties, there's no documentation. We can't really play with it, we can't fill with it, nothing. So let's change that. Let's make things interesting. So I'm going to go back to my project and I am going to charm my card. So I'm going to cast another spell here and I'm going to charm my card. Now things got really interesting, right? You can see a whole lot of things are happening over here. I have background colors set to properties, and we've got icons, and we've got more fields. Everything is now, there's definitely more dynamic code than before. Here you'll notice we've got our code that's been added here, and yeah, it's interesting now. So let's hop on back to our stories because now we need to notify the stories that, hey, we've added all of these parameters and I need to update my story now. So let's just charm this story as well. And now you'll see that I still have the navigation location set to the same path. And now I have all of these color pickers that we can pick from. And I have my story's name is no longer default, but Juliet's Quest. And some default values for all of the different parameters, and then also the colors that I'm passing through to my card example. So I just have to run the application, and yes, hot reload on Blazing Story. Unfortunately, it's not 100% stable yet. On the stories file, if you make a change, you can sometimes see the changes you made on the story as long as you're not on the docs folder. But yeah, unfortunately, maybe someone clever can fix that for us one day. But there we go. There's the code example. Notice that my story's name changed to Juliet's Quest. And there we go. I have my card. I can change the background color to whatever I want to. And it's ready for me to customize the way I want and then use within my application. So let's add a few more stories. So I'm going to hop on back here. And all I have to do now is just awaken more stories, not touch my existing codex, my card.razor component, because that is dynamic now. So in my book of spells, going to summon small stories. And now over here, you'll see I've got an extra story called Digital Inspiration. And if I scroll up, we've got a mysterious story. And then if we scroll further up, we've got Julia's Breast. So now, sorry. So now we are ready to just rerun the application. Sorry, that was my keystrokes was wrong. So we can just run the application and we should be able to see cards. And then within the cards folder, card example with additional stories underneath that. See, we've got our original Julia's Quest, her mysterious story. And then we have digital inspiration. And we can change the look and feel of this. But look here, there's a button. So if I click on this button, it's getting all the trends. And then we've got a trending window saying that, JetBrains is the best IDE. And so this is great because now we have a behavior that we can test. And this is actually a great intro to my next topic, which is Playwright. So I'm just going to hop on back over here and let's talk about Playwright. So whenever I speak to someone about Playwright, most people would say to me, yeah, I've worked on Selenium. And that's interesting. But Playwright and Selenium are both widely used tools for end-to-end testing of web applications. Selenium is older and has got a wider user base, where Playwright is a newer tool. There are some interesting things to note about Playwright. Now, it supports all modern rendering engines, ensuring comprehensive testing across all the different platforms, browsers. And tests can be run on Windows, Linux, Mac OS, both locally and as part of your automated work process in either a headless or a headed state. Now, Playwright integrates with NUnit, MSUnit, but there's no support for XUnit, unfortunately. Now, to install Playwright, we need to add the Playwright package to our project by running the CLI command or selecting it from a NetGet package manager. Once we then need to build the project, which will then generate a Playwright script file, which is located in the bin folder. And this file is a key file. With the final step of the installation is to run this Playwright.play script file to install the necessary browsers. With everything now set up, we are ready to write tests. But just before we do that, let's talk about all the tools that Playwright offers. CodeGen assists us by generating code as we navigate the application. To use it, we can just execute the Playwright script, pass through the CodeGen command, followed by the URL parameter. This will then open up the web page along with the Playwright inspector. And as we interact with the page, CodeGen record these interactions and generate test codes for us accordingly. That's pretty nice. Now, the Playwright inspector assists us with debugging our test. It will spin up the web page with the Playwright inspector, indicating with a red dot where it will be clicking next, and it will step through the code accordingly. Sorry. The trace viewer can be used to view recorded tests. Once it's set up, we can record a test and view it using the Playwright show trace command, followed by the recorded trace file. The trace viewer provides detailed information for investigating, especially failed tests, including test execution screenshots and live DOM snapshots, an action explorer, and test sources. This is pretty exciting. So no, that was not smoke and mirrors. Let's jump into the code and see this in action. So I'm just going to close all these windows and just minimize my Blazor Bootstrap project and have a look at my project file. So here you'll see this is a .NET 8 project. Down here, it is a test project. I'm using NUnit, that's the packages that I've installed, as well as Microsoft's Playwright NUnit package. So those are the tests that we'll be writing using NUnit. And then if we expand, I already created a cards folder with an empty card example test file, which is absolutely empty. And yeah, I have a spell for us. So we will just awaken the test. We are going to take advantage of in units decorations attributes for saying these are going to be a bunch of tests. Here you can see as my class is already defined, and I'm inheriting page tests from Playwright. And then I have my blank test here. Now I'm not going to write the code. What's the point of having Playwright? Right? We just saw all these amazing tools, so we want to take advantage of that. So I brewed up some potions for us that'll just speed things up a bit. And this location elixir, what it will do when I run this is it will actually execute my Playwright script in my bin folder. I'm passing through the codegen command as well as the URL to my application. So if I'm running this, I'm expecting to see, yeah, my browser that was opened up, as well as this inspector file. I'm going to make the screen white. Maybe it's a bit better for you to see. Now notice here at the top, we've got report, which means it is going to actively report any interactions that we're going to have with the web page in the background. And over here, we have a library where we can select what type of library, what type of testing framework we are using. You can see there we've got MS Test, and I'm going to use NUnit. So it will be wise for me to select NUnit for this example. And you'll notice how it actually changed the code. And this should look familiar to you already. You can see they are also inheriting from page test, and then they have two additional lines here where they have navigated to this application already. Now, if I put these two side by side, keep an eye on the Playwright Inspector as I'm going to click through the application, and you should see it updating the lines of code. Now, first of all, it highlighted the locator as well as giving us a tooltip of what the locator is. I'm then clicking on the digital inspiration component or story. And then I'm going to click on this unveil trends. Now, when I click on this, we now know that there is this screen that's going to pop up, which will be the loading screen, and then it will be the results screen. And so I want to make sure that I click on those pages so that we can test those things. I'm going to click on my trending, and then over here, there's a refresh button. And so as you can see here, we've got all of the code recorded for us. So the last thing that we have to do is we actually have to copy this code, because if you close your window, you have to do everything again. So we copy this code over here. I'm just going to close up and just go back to the code. And then let's go back here to my test. And I'm going to paste the code that I just copied from codegen. Now you'll see we've got go to, so this is where it navigated to my URL. And then this is where it started clicking on the button. So on here, we've got get by role, find a button called card example. And then we have click async. So we'll click and then wait until it finished that action. And then it's going to do the next click. So it's going to find my link called digital inspiration, because that's now the story, and it's going to click on that. And then we've got a frame locator because we're now using that frame. I'm actually clicking inside the frame now, where we've got get by role, and look at the button in that frame and click on that button. Now, interestingly enough, there's no assertions, nothing is being tested. So how will I know? It will just click on these two things once it's loaded and my test will pass. But that's not the point, is we actually want to assert and make sure that, hey, my test is actually valid, like my component is working the way I'm expecting it to work. So having those two lines is not going to help us at all. Instead, I'm going to pull out my Google card and I'm going to certify my test. And what this has done on line 19 is I'm just creating a variable for iframes just so that my code will read a bit better. So I'm just getting that frame so that we can only work with that frame. And then I'm starting my assertions and I'm saying I'm expecting that that the button will not be attached anymore because on the loading screen it's not attached. And then we are expecting this unveiling today's top trends should then be attached. And then it will be the revealing of the trends. And then we're expecting a button to have a text that says refresh. And that's going to be my test. Now, let's use the locator tool to see how this is going to work and step through the code and see how useful that's going to be. So I'm going to tap this debug draft potion of mine, which I'm just running the test in debug mode. So I'm on a Mac, so the debug command is a little bit different. And so I've got .NET test, and I'm just filtering for my only tests. Why not? But it was just to make sure that, we are safe. So I'm going to run this test, this debug test on my one and only test that's available. And I just need to bring the screen over here. Now, as you'll see, the Playwright Inspector now, the recording button is no longer enabled. It's actually disabled. But now we have this play and step buttons available for us, which we can now use to actually navigate through the lines of code. In the target, it just lists the test that we're busy testing. So if I just put these two lines next to each other, the browsers maybe, not lines, and I start stepping through the lines of code, you'll notice that there's a red dot over here indicating where it's going to click next. And then it will step through the code and show exactly what it's going to do next. Now, for the next few lines, I need to be super fast because it's going to load and then go, load and then have the loading screen and then go to the final page. So I'm just going to click, otherwise my test will fail. And now it's going to wait for the refresh button, and there we go. So now if any of the assertions fail, we all know that my test will fail. So I'm done, and let's have a look at my test now. And there we go, it's passed. My test passed. This is such a big feeling. So we have my test that's full. So now that my test actually passed on my local development environment, what if we push this through to the server and it's running in our CI/CD pipelines and it's failing for some reason, but we don't know because we don't have any eyes on this. And that's where the show trace is very, very useful to use. But it does require a little bit of setup. But luckily, we are using NUnit, and NUnit gives us two features, which is really, really useful. So for now, I'm just going to pull up my book of spells and just bewitch my test. And what this has done is actually add a setup, which is an NUnit feature, which means that NUnit will run this block of code every time a test is run. So for every test, it will run this block of code. In this block of code, I have a setup, and I'm saying this context is a Playwright method. And it says, whenever I want you to start the tracing, so whenever a new test is being executed, with a few options, tracing start options, the title will be whatever my test name is. And then I'm enabling, so you can disable these features as well. I want you to record the screenshots, the snapshots, and the source. So that's on startup. Once my test is completed, it's going to run the teardown section, and it's this teardown method. So in here, we're saying, okay, Playwright, stop your tracing for me right here with some options. And that's just to save my file into specific files. So I'm giving it a path where I'm using my work directory. I'm adding a folder called Playwright Traces, and I'm calling my test, my file, my test name .zip. So I'm expecting now to see this recording in this working directory. Now that I've finished my test, all I have to do is just run my test. And once it's done, we can have a look at our recording and see exactly what has happened in the background. We just give it a second, and there it's done. Now that my test has run, I'm going to tap my Trace Tonic Elixir. And so what this is doing is I'm using the Playwright script again. I'm passing through the show trace command, and I'm specifying the location of my file that will be the recording. And there we go. This is my test name and .zip, and there's the Playwright folder name that I've added there, and this is my working directory. So you can change that if it's in your CI/CD pipeline, so you can attach it as an artifact to your run if you so wish. So I'm just going to tap this potion or tonic, and there we go. So what you actually see up here at the very, very top, very tiny text, you'll see it's got the seconds it took to get to a certain stage of loading the application. So if I hover over the screenshots, it will then show you the screenshots and different sections as it actually loaded the screenshots. So when I get to this point over here, for example, you'll notice I've got this location click highlighted, and we've got it before. There was nothing, and then after it was clicked, that's what it looked like. So we have different steps through the code. We have some metadata that we can use as well, which is very useful if it's running there on the server. And we've got on the right-hand side, we've got some call information, anything that's been outputted to the console has been added in a network calls. And this is really, really useful. I've been there before and I have been very, very appreciative for this information. And this is also that source, the test code for our application component. So now that we know that our component is robust and it's going to work exactly the way we expect it to work every time, we now need to ensure that it is available for everyone and accessible to use. So I'm just going to close this window and just hop on back to my presentation and start my final act for the evening, which is accessibility. Now, there are many offerings when it comes to accessibility. There are many Chrome extensions and applications and libraries that we can use. But soon you'll find out why I chose Axe tonight. Now, Axe is developed by DQ. They offer a browser extension with 300,000 users. That's impressive. Once installed, you will find it in DevTools. Now, it may be hidden, but it is there. It offers free subscriptions for additional features and functionality, but its core feature is to scan the web page for accessibility issues. Now, Axe will evaluate web content against the AA Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. Now, let's just recap. The WCAG levels are ranked from A to AAA, where A is the baseline, AA is considered legally acceptable, and AAA is the highest level of accessibility. Now, once the scan is performed, it returns a score and will give us more details about its findings. So now you know why I've chosen Axe tonight, and that's because they offer a package called Axe Playwright, allowing us to automate accessibility testing within the Playwright test. So all we have to do is just install the preferred using the preferred package manager, and then we're going to reference it in our code. This will then grant access to the run Axe method on a Playwright page object, allowing us to pass options for customization. And once executed, run Axe will return an Axe result object containing comprehensive results of the Axe scan. So let's dive into the code. Let's see this in action. I'm just going to minimize this. So back into my code example test file, I am just going to pull up one of my last spells for tonight, which is going to be Um, Summons X. That's the one we're on. So over here, you'll see run Juliet, Romeo and Juliet accessibility test. And this should be familiar now. So we just basically navigate to the application. We are clicking on code example again. Then we're clicking on the story digital inspiration. And then this is interesting. What is that? We haven't seen that before. And basically what this is, on Blazing Story, there is a little button that you can click and it will open up your component in a new tab, and you will only see your component in the tab. And this is very useful if you want to test accessibility, because we are not interested in Blazing Story application being accessible as well. Just this component, is my component accessible? I then have a locator for my application, for my component rather. I'm then asserting that that locator is not empty. And then of course I need to just install this package. So I'm just going to import the missing references, because we just need to add those references up here. So if I go up, there is my package has been installed. And so what we now can do is just run this test. Now it's going to run and check if our test is accessible or not. And we are hoping it is. Alas, it's not. So we have here, it failed, and it says ensure that all the page content is contained by a landmark. And then it says that it is a moderate violation. And the tags that it failed on was on category keyboard and best practices. Not double A level, but okay. And then if I look at the next node, it says here, this was on an image tag. And it says here, it's again a moderate violation. And then some page content is not contained by landmarks. And the list continues. So this is now not great. And so we wonder if we would get the same result if we actually ran that browser extension. So let's have a look and see what the browser extension will say. So I'm just going to refresh here. And this is this button that I was referencing to earlier, where we can click on this and it will open up this component in its own tab. So there we go. We have our component and we can now test. So I'm going to go to Developer Tools. And I'm going to find my Axe Dev Tools. And then here is the full page scan. So once I click on that, it reports 5 as well with the same headings. I don't know if it looks familiar, but I know for a fact it is. So it's a document should have some main landmarks and some levels should contain headings. And so we have this best practices flag that's on. What will happen if we toggle it off? Now we don't have any failures anymore, but this is still very much a legally required. It actually passes the legal required level of accessibility. So this best practices is actually one of Axe's time-tested methods to ensure that your application or your component is of a higher standard of accessible. So we don't have to use it if we wanted to, but this is interesting. So let's say I'm not interested in using Axe's best practices tags in my testing as well. How can we deactivate that in our code? So let's hop on back to the code and go back here. And my last spell for tonight will be opinionify my, oh, we don't have to use that. And so now that I have options, which is an Axe run options object, I can specify run only options with tags. And over here, I've got my WCAG-AA, which is very important. We want to make sure we qualify legally in accessibility world, and we can just remove the best practices. Now, if we pass this options variable down to my run Axe command over here, and I run my test again, I should get 0 violations and my test should pass. So let's have a look and see. And there we go, my test passed. My application is is accessible, and that makes me very happy. So now that we know that our component is robust, it is accessible to everyone, we can take over the world. So I want to thank everyone for tonight. All the insights I shared tonight are all backed up by extensive research. Everything is detailed in blogs on Medium. If you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn to maybe discuss anything further. I used Microsoft Designer to generate images that brought my presentation to life. The core inspirations are all from online tutorials. And thank you all for being here tonight and for your time and support. I truly appreciate it. And a huge thank you to JetBrains. I'm such a fan, and I'm so honored to get to speak at one of your events. Your apps and support to the developer community are just truly inspiring. You just stay awesome. And so I want to leave you with a Shakespeare quote for tonight. And it's to be or not to be, that's the question. Whether it's nobler in the mind to suffer, the slings and arrow of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of trouble and by opposingly end them. And that's it. Thank you.
Oh, Martin, you're still muted.
Every single time I have this happen. I was just going to say thank you, Mariekie. It was a really interesting talk. And also, I know you shared the love with JetBrains, but I also want to share some love towards you here, because I think it's really cool how you've made use of live templates in Writer to speed up the live coding and make that look really, really snappy. So well done there.
Big fan of the Book of Spells. We could do with more books of spells, I think. This is good. I got a couple of questions. I'm not particularly familiar with sort of Blazor and front-end type development, so I'm not familiar with Storybook itself. Can I just make sure that I got this right? It's a kind of an application or a container that allows you to build your own components, work on like a design system, work on them in isolation, and then use them to sort of put into an application. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's like having a library on its own, which will speed up your development cycles because you've got a template to work from. Now, Storybook is something that the JavaScript front end developers will use, and it's very, very advanced, very, very rich, feature rich. Where Blazing Story is not. It's someone's personal project, but I just find it to be so useful, and it has really changed and improved my development speed as well. I just want the world to know about this.
Yeah, no, it looks really cool. It looks like a really useful thing, and I just wanted to understand that I was getting it right, because that kind of then leads me on to another question of how does sort of dependency management work there? If you've got Blazing Story to kind of host your components, how do you kind of mix everything together? Do you have to have Blazing Story kind of as a dependency to your application, or how does it work? Or is it just kind of like a testing ground, which you then push your components to somewhere else to do it? How would you manage those sort of dependencies and lifetimes?
It can definitely be that. Or in Blazing Story, you can reference a component library. So you can't reference a web app, but you can reference a component library in Blazing Story. And that could maybe help you get around that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. That makes a lot more sense there. And similarly, then I was wondering if you'd be able to. I don't know if you've still got the code up there. Would you be able to just kind of take me through a little bit of the Blazing Story Bootstrap project?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it did, just point out any of the kind of useful, or I don't know, main. What am I trying to say? The highlights basically.
The highlights? Well, the highlights is the fact that it's actually very standard, as you can see. It's a WebAssembly, Blazor WebAssembly application. And I have the components right here in my Blazor project. You don't have to have that at all. And this is just a normal standard Blazor component, which is not really your question, but this is now tightly coupled with my story, because my story is now referencing back to that component. And this is the nice part. This is the part where we can go and specify default values to properties and change the look and feel and behavior of that component. Now, I'm not sure if I go back to the app, it's still running over here. I'm just going to go just close that tab. But if you are here on the docs folder, which is quite useful, so if any other developer now needs to use your component, they can come here, and there's some documentation about that, but they can change the look and feel of the component right here. I don't have any specific colors now, but let's say that's your big change. You can click on show code, and for every property, it's actually predefined to get this specific view. So all you have to do now is just copy this code and then paste it to wherever you actually want to call this component. It should help a bit.
Oh yeah, very much. I can see how this would be really cool. Thank you. That's a good one. I was going to ask about Playwright as well. I noticed that Playwright's there. I mean, it's a fantastic demo. Look, I've used Selenium before in the past, but Playwright's much more advanced than when I was using it, at least. And it looks really cool. I love the fact that you can write tests for accessibility. That's really useful there. I was just wondering, did you just say that it's only N units that it supports, or could it use some X unit as well?
It uses not X unit, MS test and N unit. There's no support for X unit, unfortunately.
Okay, cool. Is it a Microsoft project as well? I noticed the package name had Microsoft in
Yeah,
there.
so I used to have the notes on that, but yeah, Microsoft bought it over a few years ago. It was owned by another company, and they've now bought it over, as far as I know. And yeah, so the package name says Microsoft in there as well.
Yeah. No, it's really cool. It looks like a very useful tool for all the code gen and the tracing and stuff. Looks really great way to be able to test your applications.
That's a lot.
It is actually really cool. I recently saw someone use Playwrights to generate screenshots for their documentation. So not just for testing, but essentially do an end-to-end scenario where they would click, enter a name, move the mouse, things like that, and then just grab screenshots whenever they were required for documentation. And that was really cool because whenever they did UI update, for example, they would get new screenshots auto-generated and added to the documentation. So really nice. Perhaps also a quick tip for people watching the stream here. We have a tool called JetBrains Aqua, or a plugin to JetBrains Writer if you want to install the test management plugin. That can definitely help you with like finding all the different selectors and so on that you have on your page. Works with Selenium, but also with Playwright, for example. So make sure to check that out, I would say.
That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Definitely will look into that. Yeah.
A couple of other questions from the chat. A lot of Playwright-related questions, I would say. One was, how do you test after a login screen? So how would you write a test that requires a login where you go through that entire flow and make that work?
Yeah, so you can definitely save states of when you run your tests. So you can have one piece of test where you actually log in, and it will save that state. And then for every test that you run after that, you just call that state, share that state, and then it will continue from there onwards.
So it's essentially a little bit like you would have cookies stored in Playwright, and then you can reuse those cookies over and over in subsequent tests. Cool. Yeah.
Similar to that. Yeah.
Another one was someone asking about whether Playwright can introspect Blazor WebAssembly states directly, or can it just use the document object model and the JavaScript state that is there?
That's an interesting question. I have to admit, I don't know. Sorry, not sure about that.
Honestly, yeah, same thing. I would say DOM for sure, because that's what Playwright does, but I have no idea about the WebAssembly state that is there. Yeah, there was one more question. I'm not really sure if it's a question that you can answer or whether it's more of a philosophical thing. It was about backwards compatibility of having Razor components and so on, and having pure HTML kind of components. So maybe let's go into the philosophical thing there. And again, also not sure if you're aware of web components, for example. How do you see Blazor evolve with something like web components, for example? Do you think that web components are going to become more popular in Blazor as well? Or do you think that most Blazor teams will be using Blazor components that might utilize a web component at some point? Or like, how do you see that evolving?
Yeah, well, I think both technologies will evolve. I have spoken to colleagues way back, and they were huge fans of web components and told me how very powerful this is. And in comparison with Blazor, that's relatively new in comparison. It's I think both technologies will just evolve over time. I don't think one will die. I think they both will just evolve over time. I'm very, very optimistic about Blazor, and I think it's going to stay here, and it's going to be a very, very good candidate for UI development.
Are you already
Can
using it in production at the moment?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And
That's why I'm smiling so big. I'm super happy. Yeah.
I'm presumably using the Blazing Story and Playwright as well then, and
Yeah.
it's all working out nicely.
Yeah, well, it comes with challenges. We've had some, especially, you don't want to, when you log in, where do you save your password and how do you work around that? Having it in the CI/CD pipeline, and that's why I know I've had so many issues trying to figure out what's going wrong with my test in the pipeline, because Playwright also offers a Docker image that you can use, which is very useful in the pipelines as well. So yeah, we are using it. We are finding it useful.
So back in the day when I was doing testing with Selenium, testing in CI/CD was really difficult, and they were using trying to use headless browsers and things. Now, how does it work currently with Playwright? Is that
So you can specify options. There is a way that you can actually specify options whether you want to run your test in head full or headless state, and same with when you're running it on the pipeline. But when you do your tracing, it will just record those screens. But it depends on your options that I set up there in my startup section as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. No, I'm new to a bunch of all of this there, so it's been really interesting to see how all this works and fits together. I can see how those all of the pieces there would work together to give you a nice working environment. I love the idea of having a storybook. Great, of components which you can then pick and choose and bring into your application.
It's pretty cool. It's like building a design system that then people in the company can use, or people in other teams can use and reuse, and everything looks the same and feels the same. And it's tested for accessibility and everything, so that's really nice.
Yeah, which is the kind of thing I really need because I've got no front end skills at all, and so to be able to pick up components and be able to use them like that, and also to test them in isolation to see what it would look like, I find that very, very useful.
Useful, definitely. Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear. Great.
All right. I think with that, Mariekie, again, thank you for a fantastic talk.